Wanna talk? So let's talk. Here. Talk. You wanna talk? You gotta talk, you need to talk. News talk.
I talk, you talk to Solomon. I talk, you talk to Solomon. Yeah, let's talk to Solomon. Talk to Solomon.
Welcome back. Talk to Solomon time. Dr. Alan Tues is our guest of honor. Greg Howard, Chief Steve, and I are having a discussion primarily about the Second Amendment, guns, and that has been brought on by the terrible tragedy of the loss of those children. Isn't it amazing? We have a nation going crazy because 20 babies were slaughtered. And they should. They didn't react enough as far as I'm concerned. Every child is a potential blessing for many, if not all of us. But we're murdering 3,000+ equally precious, innocent babies every year just in the United States. A third of a million of them by Planned Parenthood alone, and most people don't want to believe it's a problem. Now, I'm not going to get into, is abortion wrong? It is. Anyone that doesn't agree with that needs to have a lobotomy, and I happen to have some gift certificates. But we had this guy on CNN, Piers Morgan, who's watched by 12 people, half of them sober, the other half dead, and he invited on a guy named Alex Jones, who I, frankly, helped start in his career. He didn't need my help, but he was on my program when he first started. And he's got his strengths and his weaknesses like all of us. But he went into the lion's den. He took on Piers Morgan. And he, even though he was called crazy and lunatic and whatever else by them, which he doesn't care about, he made a point. And this was the point, and I want to get everyone's comments starting with Dr. Keys. Try to disarm America, and you will instigate war in the United States between the people who have and the people who want to take them away. Dr. Keys.
Well, Stan, I think it's important to remember that from the point of view of people who are standing on their rights, doing the right thing, and doing it, by the way, peacefully and without bothering anybody, when someone then comes to interfere with that, okay, it is exactly correct to say that the people who are interfering with the exercise of right are instigating, starting, declaring, and carrying out war, because that's what's going on if they are using force to try to achieve their objectives. And I think that that's a statement that, I don't know, is perfectly clear, perfectly logical. And by the way, it is required if in point of fact we are people, and this includes everybody in government at pretty much every level in America, all the people who are in the military and the law enforcement people and all these folks, they are all required to take an oath to uphold, protect, defend, preserve, and respect the Constitution of the United States. And the Constitution is clear that the right of the people to keep and bear arms, not of the government, not of the federal government, not of the state government, not of the local government, but of the people. That is, those of us composed of individual warm bodies, of folks created by God, from whose hands come those unalienable rights. And if you come to disarm them, you have essentially declared war upon the Constitution, because you're trampling on the clear, explicit, unequivocal statement in the supreme law of the land that this right to keep and bear arms shall not be, what does the word infringed mean, by the way? It basically means that you can't trespass against it. You can't break in on it and rip it apart. Okay, that's the root of that word, means to break in upon, to destroy. You can't do that. And if someone does it, they do not act lawfully. They commit simply an act of war upon you. They take you out of the state or condition of civil society under the Constitution and declare war against you and against your liberty. And so I think the statement is just a statement of fact, Stan, and it's logical in light both of the Constitution and ultimately, of course, of the responsibility that we have before God. Let me ask you a question. If you have a responsibility before God to do X, and someone comes to you and says, you must give up the means to do X, can you do that if you have a responsibility before God to do X? No, you can't. In this particular case, X involves the defense of innocent life, of your family and of your community and of those with whom you share that God-endowed liberty. It's not just that you have the freedom to stand in their defense. You have an obligation before God to do so. And if you thoughtlessly surrender the means that allow you to fulfill that obligation, you have failed in your responsibility. And I'd like people to think this through, because there's too much loose talk, as if the Second Amendment is about some kind of whimsical liberty that people are asserting to do what they want. No. It is about carefully preserving the conditions and means required to fulfill your obligation to God. And therefore, if you surrender the means to fulfill that obligation, then you violate your duty. And so folks need to think this through, Stan, especially if there are people in this country, and I know there are, I think it's the overwhelming majority still, who are not prepared to see this country turned into some sick little tin pot dictatorship, Harry Belafonte and his notwithstanding. And so that said, I think we need to realize that this issue of the Second Amendment is exactly what Alex Jones says it is. And that ought to sober us, Stan. I've been trying to get people to deal with this issue soberly for many years. This is not a game. It is literally life and death for our country. Wake up and understand this.
No, let me take what you've just said and put it on a little smaller scale, but maybe people can relate a little bit better. Then I'm going to go to Greg. Greg has kids. Steve has kids. I have kids. You have kids. If my children, when they were small, think about this, folks. If you were with your children and they were 3, 4, 5-year-olds, and by some means they got away. Now, you shouldn't have let them get away, but they got away. And they would come to you and say, the store is closing, you have to leave. And you're saying, my kids are in here, I'm not going anywhere until I find my kids. Well, you can come back when we open tomorrow. Now, can you imagine a parent, any kind of parent, saying, oh, I'm not going to break the rules, I'll come back tomorrow? No. We have an obligation, to use Dr. Key's words, to take care of, to protect our children. Would you, any of you, leave that store and come back the next morning to look for your 2 and 3 and 4-year-old kids that had somehow gotten lost? Greg.
The question is ludicrous. Of course,
but it's no different than the question they're asking us now. What Dr. Kesey just said. It's exactly the same question.
And I love the fact that you boiled it down that way, because maybe it will make sense to people that way. Because I just had a person tweet to me on Twitter while Alan was saying that so beautifully. Let's hope the NRA stands strong, because once guns are gone, we're gone. And I shot back to him immediately that if you're going to rely on the NRA to defend your Second Amendment rights, you do not understand the Second Amendment. This is the problem I'm running into so many times. There are people of good hearts out there, but they have been so taken away from their founder's DNA, as I call it, they have no concept of the fact that they're almost no different than the liberals that they complain about. They're sitting around waiting for Daddy GOP to come and save them from Daddy Liberal. The people in this country need to understand that we the people means we the people. Not they the government, not they the representative, not they the party leaders, not they the NRA. It means we the people. We the people are going to have to stand up and take care of we the people's rights, which come from He the Father, God. And if we're not going to take care of those rights, then we might as well line up in the slaughterhouse, have our necks cut, and be sent down the chute.
Chief?
Well, to get back to your scenario with the children at the store, what the liberals would tell us is that what you should do is just be respectful of the business owner's property and call the police, let the police find your children for you. But in some years past, there was a case that went before the United States Supreme Court where a victim of a crime sued their police department and said the police should have protected me and I want restitution for what happened to me. And the Supreme Court ruled in that case and said the police do not have the ability or the duty to protect everyone. And so now we face where the Supreme Court may make some ruling on the Second Amendment, but they can't in the same context say that police can't protect you, but you don't need your guns because the police will protect you. That cannot happen. It just doesn't make any sense. But what I believe needs to go on now is something that all of us have hit on here is that, and Alan talked about right and duty. I believe it's our duty. It is our duty to exercise our Second Amendment. We should all now be encouraging people to obtain their firearm as it's their duty under the Second Amendment. And as Greg related to, then also learn how to use it properly, because that's part of what the militia is supposed to have accomplished. But
that's what well-regulated means.
That's what it means. But use it or lose it. And it's time we should start using it. It's our duty, and let's get on with it.
I want to give you a statement. It's not an exact quote, but it's real close. Your survival is not an adequate rationale for you having a weapon. Let me repeat that. Your survival is not an adequate rationale for your having a weapon. Now, Alvin, I'm sure, knows that's in the Australian new gun law after that slaughter in a Tasmanian school, very similar to the slaughter that took place in the Connecticut school. They decided that your survival is not as important as them not having to worry about you using your gun for the wrong reason. Dr. Keys.
Well, Stan, I think that summarizes where these people want to take us. They want to take us into a world in which our God-endowed right to life is not any longer to be respected by government. So the need to make sure that people are fulfilling their obligation to God to preserve themselves and those to whom He has entrusted to their care. That is no longer going to be an argument that constrains, limits, directs, and otherwise governs those who are entrusted with government power. People ought to be asking themselves, Stan, once that constraint is removed, you do realize that government then becomes the agent and people become the instruments of government, up to and including their ability of government to waste our lives in whatever fashion they please, without regard to the responsibility we have to God to preserve ourselves and those He has entrusted to our care. This is the unique and beautiful thing about a country founded on the doctrine of unalienable rights that come to us from God. Stan, that statement in the context of such unalienable rights, that statement in some law in Australia, announces that that is not a law. That is, in fact, a statement of lawless intent, because they are basically saying, notwithstanding the precepts of the natural law that require that every person, to the extent possible, preserve themselves and all of mankind. That's what Locke said. We have a duty to everybody to respect life as God has endowed us with life, starting with our own and those entrusted to our care. They're now saying, well, that doesn't matter. Throw that out. Because what, Stan? don't people realize that once you have removed that understanding, that respect for the rights that come to us from God, for right action as dictated to us and obliged upon us by the will of God, once that respect is gone, government ceases to be an instrument of good and becomes a powerful tool that can be used for any purpose, including the most dark and wicked purposes imaginable. And all people have to do is say, well, we passed this law, we have this edict, and you just have to do what you're told. And that brings us back to the Second Amendment, doesn't it? Because, as was said a few minutes ago, you look at the history of self-government, and in a practical way, the most important epoch in the development of self-government was, in fact, when people began to understand that it was not some noble class, not some warrior caste or something that was responsible for the defense of the community and of their God-given rights, but they themselves. That was the spirit of the Roundheads in the history of England that led to the creation of the New Model Army. It was the spirit of the American patriots who understood that this was between the individual and God, not something that you could therefore surrender to government. And I think it's key to understanding the deep seriousness of this, that we remember that.
I almost want to stop the show now because I think we've made the point collectively in a way that, excuse me, that is transferable. That, you know, you can say to someone, just listen and consider. So I'm just going to do one more round here, and we're going to wrap this up. Start with you, Greg.
I think what we need to do is we've got to get out of what I call threat lockdown. This is a remnant from our earlier days when we would either run, fight, or freeze in the face of danger, you know, when we were, you know, pretty much savages, okay? We are right now, many patriots are living in a state of threat lockdown. As a result, we're frozen. We don't know what to do. We're waiting for someone else to act. We're waiting for someone else to give us a lead. We're waiting for leaders I don't think are going to appear unless we find them within our own ranks. If we're waiting for people within a party to come forward and lead, I think we're going to be waiting a very, very long time. I have seen nothing resembling leadership out of the GOP for the past 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Occasionally a bright light will come, but it is snuffed out by the media and the party leaders. It is not allowed to shine for very long before they decide, no, this is not the man we want or the woman that we want. You move to the back of the bus. We have our own agenda, and it doesn't include freedom like you're speaking about. I think we've got to start understanding that we've got to stop waiting for someone else to solve our problems, and we're going to have to start taking it to the streets ourselves. We're going to have to start raising our own voices, and we're going to have to stop tweeting to each other and speaking to each other in an echo chamber. Preaching to the choir isn't going to change anything. Sending each other tweets on Twitter of, oh, isn't this terrible? Oh, my gosh, we've got to stand up and do something. Well, somebody's got to stand. I'll stand. Others are standing. But somebody's got to stand with us, or somebody's got to stand beside us. And if somebody wants to walk out in front of me, I'll follow them. But sooner or later, we have got to start doing something, because talking this problem to death is not going to make us free. And I cannot stand sitting here talking about it, and I show up at these rallies, and the numbers are dwindling because, oh, we've got to take care of our jobs and our businesses. Our founding fathers had jobs, businesses, and farms. I don't want to hear it. I want to see some people who want to stand up and believe in their country and believe in the Constitution and tell these people in Washington, this will not stand. That's what I want to see. And if for lack of anyone else, join me in Montgomery at the Capitol Steps building where I met Alan Keyes for the first time. I'll join you there. or if you want to meet in Washington, D.C. as a counter-protest to Obama's inauguration, let me know. I'll join you there. But we have got to do something. Thank you.
Now, I just want to say, right on, Greg, I'm with you 100%. We definitely need action. The Bible says it takes more than thought. It requires action to get things done. You're right on the money. Something Dr. Keith said, though, hit me, and he said we need to remember these things, but I do believe that a lot of Americans can't remember because they were never taught this in the first place. So one thing we really can do is educate everyone that we are around about these facts and what's going on here. And as I said before, we're going to have to encourage people to get into the education system, and so that our kids and our college students can be taught about what America is really about and not what the left wants them to know.
Or get them the hell out of public school.
Close public schools. I'm all for that right now.
Dr. Keys.
Well, Stan, this comes full circle because I mentioned at the beginning an article that I wrote in 1999 called that was about educating the defenders of liberty. It's up under that title on my blog, and I would really recommend that people read it, spread it about if you can, not because what is said there is a perfect answer. Let me be clear about this. A perfect answer is never going to come from some individual like me or any other. In a matter like this, the answer is to be worked out community by community, right where you live, amongst people who have done what is talked about on the program here. If you don't see a leader, be the leader. Can y'all get that through your heads? If you don't see a leader, be the leader. That's the American way. We don't sit on our butts waiting for somebody else to do something about the traffic light out down the street our children cross to get to school. We go knock on the doors of our neighbors and say, we need to do something about this. We don't wait for somebody in government, somebody in power, somebody with money, somebody else to take care of our affairs. And especially in this vital matter, this is what's required. And I talk about in that article some of the things that need to be emphasized, including the fact that starting young, folks need to be disabused of any fear of the instruments of self-defense, but in a context that reminds us of the truth. Do you know what's really at stake in the fear they're trying to foment about guns and all? I'll be frank, y'all. It's fear of our own depravity. They have encouraged us to become a people preoccupied with our material ambitions, ruled over by objects that we desire and that force us to lie and cheat and do other things we despise in ourselves. And so when they come to us and say, well, this gun irresistibly will lead you to violence, part of us is going, yeah, look at how I've handled my life. These objects get me to do all these things. What we need to remember, I think, and it's why I always have been clear, I wear proudly and remember without hesitation the importance of my faith to the liberty of my country. Why is that? Because on our own, I don't think we do have the capacity to deal with a lot of these weighty matters. But if we are willing to let the mind be in us that was in our Lord and Savior, if we are willing to let the precepts rule us that have come to us from God, then we have the wisdom and will find in ourselves the resources and self-discipline and courage so that we do not need to fear that we shall use the means of self-defense for wickedness, because we find in ourselves the goodwill that God makes possible. That's why I'll end it on that note, Stan, because I think at the end of the day, when we talk about the right to keep and bear arms, we are in the end also talking about the confidence we have in our deep reliance upon the one who can give us the right mind and the right heart and the right judgment, so that we need not fear our use of those arms will be anything but what serves justice and the right.
In the old country, in various countries, they always used to say, God save the king, or God save the queen. We've reached a time in history when it is we who must do the saving and we who must be saved. So what is the proper response? Maybe it is get off your ass. This is Talk to Solomon. Thanks for listening.